Every financial guru, every uncle at Christmas dinner, every motivational reel on your phone is saying the same thing right now. Buy property, build wealth, become a landlord. But here's what nobody is finishing that sentence with. In 2026, the math behind that advice is silently falling apart, and most people chasing the real estate dream won't notice until they're already trapped inside it. Zillow just released data showing that before you earn a single dollar from a rental property, the average homeowner is already hemorrhaging $15,979 every year in costs that have nothing to do with their mortgage. And that number is rising faster than your income. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand why some of the wealthiest people alive quietly moved their money out of real estate years ago and what they put it into instead. Let me tell you about the story we've all been sold. You work your 9 to 5, you save a down payment, you buy a property, you rent it out, tenants pay your mortgage, the property appreciates, and 10 years later, you're financially free. Sounds clean, sounds logical. And honestly, it used to work like that in a lot of places. The problem is that this version of real estate was born in a different interest rate environment, a different insurance landscape, and a time when you could actually find positive cash flow on a rental without needing a calculator and a prayer. That era is over, and I'm not saying that to be dramatic. I'm saying it because the actual 2025 and 2026 numbers are telling a story that the real estate influencers won't touch, because their entire business model depends on you believing the old version is still true. So let's look at what's actually happening. Here's the part that kills me about how real estate gets sold. You go to a seminar, watch a YouTube video, listen to a podcast, and what do they talk about? Appreciation, rental income, leverage, tax benefits, all real, all potentially true. What they don't put on the whiteboard is what Zillow and Thumbtack published in November 2025 after analyzing real homeownership data across the country. The average American homeowner in 2025 spent $15,979 a year on costs that aren't the mortgage. That's an extra $1,325 every single month before you've made $1 in rent. Break it down. Maintenance alone averages $10,946 a year. That's roofs, plumbing, HVAC, pest control, appliances, flooring, all the things tenants destroy that you're responsible for replacing. Property taxes add another $3,030. And then there's insurance. Now, this is where I need you to really pay attention. Homeowners insurance premiums in the United States have increased 48% since 2020. The nationwide average is now over $2,000 a year on a typical home. But that's the comfortable number. In Miami, $4,607 a year, up 72% in 5 years. Jacksonville, Tampa, Orlando, all up 68 to 72%. Colorado is up 77%. The Federal Reserve itself published a note in September 2025 confirming that multifamily property insurance costs per unit increased by more than 75% between 2019 and 2024 in real terms. So when someone tells you real estate is passive income, what they're actually describing is a business with rising operating costs that are now outpacing income growth. Zillow confirmed it. Hidden costs grew 4.7% last year. Household incomes, only 3.8%. You are running faster just to stay in the same place. Let's talk about what passive actually means when you own a rental property. Your tenant calls you at 11 p.m. because the boiler stopped working. You now have two choices: spend 3 hours on the phone trying to find an emergency plumber who charges weekend rates, or lose the tenant. That is your Tuesday night. Your tenant stops paying rent. You now spend 4 to 6 months navigating the legal eviction process, paying your mortgage the whole time, with zero income coming in. In some cities, that process takes longer. That is your next 6 months. You hire a property manager to handle this so it actually becomes passive. Now you're paying 8 to 12% of gross rent every month to someone else. Add that to your insurance spike, your maintenance bills, your property tax reassessments, and suddenly that positive cash flow property you bought is either breaking even or bleeding. Real estate investors have a rule called the 50% rule. Roughly half of your gross rental income disappears into operating expenses. And according to data from 2025, with inflated repair costs and higher insurance, many VSEO investors are now seeing that number push toward 55 to 60%. So on a property that rents for $2,000 a month, you might actually keep $800 to $1,000 after all costs, before you factored in your mortgage, before you factored in vacancy months, before you factored in that one tenant who punched a hole through the wall. This is not passive income. This is a second job that occasionally pays you and frequently doesn't. Here's where the conversation usually gets uncomfortable for real estate believers, because now we have to look at the actual numbers side by side. Researchers at the Penrose team published a deep analysis comparing a $34,340 down payment invested in an S&P 500 index fund in 2000 versus using that same money as a down payment on a Phoenix home. After 25 years, the stock investment completely hands-off. Zero phone calls, zero maintenance, no tenants grew to approximately $225,000. Now, that Phoenix home did well too, especially because Phoenix was one of the hottest appreciation markets in the country. But the stock investor didn't have to manage anything, didn't have to pay insurance that kept doubling, didn't have to deal with evictions or vacancies, or a roof that needed replacing in year 14. And here's the bigger picture. The S&P 500 has returned roughly 10% per year over the long term. Real estate appreciation, stripped of leverage, averages 4 to 5% per year. In 2025 specifically, REITs, which are real estate investment vehicles, returned just 2.5%. The S&P 500 was up 17% that same year. That gap isn't always that dramatic, but the trend is real. Even Warren Buffett and I know everyone gets tired of hearing his name. But the man has been right about everything for 60 years, said this at a Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meeting. There's just so much more opportunity, at least in the United States, that presents itself in the security market than in real estate. When the greatest investor alive is telling you stocks beat property, maybe that's worth sitting with for a moment. Now, the counter argument you'll hear is, but leverage. You can't leverage an index fund like you can real estate. That's true, and leverage is real estate's single biggest genuine advantage. When you put 20% down on a property and it appreciates, you get the full return on 100% of the asset. That's powerful. But leverage is a weapon that cuts in two directions. Right now, and in 2026, mortgage rates are sitting around 6 to 7%. Cap rates in most major markets, which is essentially the property's return before financing, are 4 to 5%. You are borrowing money at 6 to 7% to buy an asset yielding 4 to 5%. That is mathematically upside down. You're paying more in interest than the property returns. The only way you survive that equation is appreciation, which is now moderating after pandemic-era spikes and rent increases that can no longer keep up with your rising costs. An analysis from Discount Property Investor captured this exact scenario. Investors who bought in late 2025 are now facing insurance premiums up another 8% projected for 2026 to 2027, property tax reassessments from inflated valuations, and rent growth of just 0.3 to 3% nationally. The positive cash flow that looked certain on a spreadsheet is now a negative number in real life. And this isn't a temporary problem you wait out. The insurance crisis is structural. Climate change is making it worse, not better. The Federal Reserve tracked a 75% rise in multifamily insurance costs in 5 years. Newsweek reported in January 2026 that hidden housing costs are now being called one of the biggest financial risks homeowners will face this year. Now, I need to say something important here, because I'm not trying to tell you real estate never works. That would be dishonest, and you deserve the full truth. Real estate absolutely still builds wealth for people who Buy significantly below market value foreclosures, estate sales, distressed properties where the math works from day one because the purchase price is low enough to absorb all those costs. Own property in high-demand, undersupplied markets where rental income genuinely exceeds all costs, not on paper. In reality, after maintenance and insurance and vacancy are factored in. Use real estate as one piece of a diversified portfolio, not their entire strategy. The people who have made generational wealth in real estate typically also held stocks, built businesses, and diversified, have deep knowledge of a specific local market, not someone who watched a 3-hour course and bought a property 2 states away. And here's the version of real estate that actually makes sense for most regular people right now: REITs, real estate investment trusts. Let you own a slice of commercial or residential real estate portfolios, get dividend income, and sell in seconds if you need the money. No tenant calls, no broken boilers, no insurance crisis that doubles your costs overnight, just exposure to real estate returns without the operational nightmare. So if not direct property ownership as a primary strategy in 2026, then what? The answer isn't glamorous, but it's honest. Consistent, automated investing in low-cost index funds builds more wealth for more people than almost any other vehicle available. Not because real estate is bad, but because of what index funds don't require from you. They don't require $60,000 up front. They don't require you to become an expert in local rental markets. They don't penalize you with $16,000 a year in hidden costs before you've earned $1. And they don't trap you in an illiquid asset when your life changes and you need to move quickly. The 2000 to 2025 S&P 500 data showed a $34,000 investment growing to $225,000 completely passively. No maintenance calls, no insurance crisis, no tenant who stopped paying rent in month 3. The honest message here isn't never buy property. It's that buying a primary residence to live in is different from treating property as your wealth-building engine. And right now, in 2026, using index fund investing as your primary wealth vehicle and potentially adding to REITs for real estate exposure without the operational headache is a strategy that most financial research actually supports. Look, the reason real estate mythology is so powerful is because it's tangible. You can drive past your property. You can show someone a picture of it. It feels real in a way that a brokerage account number doesn't. But wealth doesn't care about feelings. It cares about math. And the math in 2026 is clear. Direct real estate as a primary wealth building strategy is harder, more expensive, and riskier than it was even 5 years ago. Insurance costs rising 48%, hidden costs exceeding $16,000 a year, cap rates inverted below borrowing costs, operating expenses consuming 50% or more of gross rent. The people quietly winning right now aren't the ones with the most properties. They're the ones who did the actual math before they bought into the dream. And now you have math too. If this is different from what you usually hear about real estate, that's the point. Subscribe to Profit Plot. Every video on this channel is built on real data, not recycled advice. See you in the next one.